Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are picking up with the conclusion of Batman Superman number 5. And for those of you guys who have been following along with this, you guys are aware that what's been going on here is the Batman Who Laughs kind of had this grand plan, right? This great big huge grand scheme. And the idea is that it originated really arriving on Earth during the events of the Dark Knight's Metal storyline. Now, some people had asked, and I'd seen this in the comments, some people had thought the Batman Who Laughs had been killed during the events of Dark Knight's Metal. And the reality is that he hadn't, right? The Batman Who Laughs actually just kind of skirted around a little bit. He was part of the Immortal Men, I think it was, for a little while, although nothing really significant was done with him. I think he just kind of appeared like once in the first issue. It wasn't really until we got to the Batman story, that we basically saw, this whole depiction of the Batman Who Laughs plan. But the idea is that this plan has really been going on for quite some time. And so the indication here is that the actions of Barbados and all those guys during Dark Knight's Metal was really more of something they were doing, and the Batman Who Laughs was forming his own scheme along the way. But what he had done, at least what we knew about him, is that in his own universe, when he had destroyed all the various superheroes, including the Justice League and Superman and so on and so forth, that what he had intended to do was to basically repurpose the Watchtower, the Justice League Watchtower in his own universe, so that he could basically spread his influence throughout any world that he arrives in. And that's what he's been doing here, right? The whole idea was to basically create a circumstance whereby the entire Kryptonian system could be manipulated by Jaime Reyes due to his ability to tap into technology, and then with the other members of the Infected, with Jim Gordon and those various characters, they could essentially open a portal to the Dark Multiverse, or to the universe of the Batman Who Laughs, and then bring the Justice League Watchtower through and infect the entire Earth in one fell swoop. That's really what he's been shooting to do the entire time. And at the end of the last issue, they succeeded in pulling the Watchtower through. Now remember, the Batman Who Laughs is currently held in prison below the Hall of Justice, and he's been there since the Batman story, right? Even when this story first picked up, he's been there the entire time. But one of the things that goes on is that the infection that he's basically spread to Supergirl, to Donna Troy, to Hawkman, and these various characters, is that it allows him to communicate with them on a frequency that only they can hear. Presumably, this was developed by the Batman Who Laughs in order to ensure that Superman couldn't overhear. But it's kind of funny here, because when this goes down, Batman and Superman still play their roles. And in fact, Williamson does a really good job of explaining to us why it is that they do what they do and how they're functioning this way. But what they end up doing is Superman initially tries to talk them down. Now, the reality of this is that on the surface, they seem too far gone, right? They seem too far to be able to talk back into reason. That's just not really the case anymore. Instead, it's just kind of like, these guys are screwed, and like, there's no way to get them back. That's kind of the indication that's put on here. But the reality is that where some of the bugs and the various organisms that exist inside Superman's Fortress of Solitude are basically brought into this location, at the end of the day, they're able to kind of offer some measure of resistance, but the main focus is the Watchtower itself. Now, of course, Superman ends up traveling to the Watchtower, and Batman's basically facing off against a couple forces along the way. The problem with this, and this is where things really get hairy, is that when Superman actually enters the Watchtower, then he sees the full gravity of what's going on. The fact that the entire Justice League from the Batman Who Laughs universe has been killed, and then he turns around, and of course, he sees the bodies of himself as well as Lois Lane and Jonathan Kent. Now, this is where things get really screwed up, right? Because if you guys recall, during the origin story of the Batman Who Laughs, one of the things that he had done is where the Joker had died, and ultimately Bruce Wayne ingested this super potent toxin that turned him into the Batman Who Laughs, that when he had basically traveled and kind of brought Superman in, tricked him into being there, that Superman and Jonathan were exposed to black kryptonite, which basically twisted them up, screwed them up, and they ended up being the ones to kill Lois Lane, presumably beating her to death. And then they themselves seemed to succumb to kryptonite. Now, I don't think it's explicitly stated that they ended up dying from black kryptonite exposure, but at this point, I don't know what else would have killed them. And so as a result of that, it's really cool because then Shazam and Supergirl show up on the scene, and you get to see something that you don't really get to see all that often, where Shazam sort of taunts Superman, and says, oh yeah, man, it was bad that happened, but I guess you were just too weak in your universe, and kind of giving him a hard time, making fun of him, basically, calling him pathetic and so on and so forth. And even where Supergirl joins in and says, yeah, like, I'm sorry about your loss, even if it is your family from another world, but this basically just shows how outmatched you are, that you would be happier if you joined us, different things like that. Superman flips out. He absolutely lashes out. And again, you don't get to see that you don't get to see this very often, but it is cool to see when it does happen, because Supergirl is totally taken by surprise. She's like, holy crap, I didn't even know this was coming. Now, this is one of those things that fans really point to when they talk about the strength differences between Superman and Supergirl, because traditionally, like one of the things we mentioned in the previous video is that historically, Supergirl's always been shown to be stronger and more powerful than Superman. But a lot of you guys also made a really, really good point when what you said was that oftentimes at the same time, to kind of accompany remedy that, Supergirl's usually shown to be more reckless. And so because of that, she doesn't really hold back in the same way Superman does. And so the indication that Superman could actually be, and seems to be possibly more powerful than Supergirl, he just holds back his strength a lot more. And it kind of makes sense, right? Lex Luthor and Superman get into a knockdown, drag out fight, and he just punches Lex Luthor with all his strength. Well, he's gonna punch him into oblivion. Falcon punch! Like, that's basically what it's gonna end up turning into. Just punching the absolute hell out of him. And so because that, Superman usually holds back. But in this instance, he doesn't really have to, because both Supergirl and Shazam can take it. The other part of this is very quick thinking on his behalf, right? Shazam trying to call down his thunder, Superman stepping out of the way, it ultimately ends up hitting Supergirl. It's cool to see these small little moments go down, but Superman is highly pissed off. And because of that, it's one of these things where he's at a precipice where he could snap. And that's really what the Batman Who Laughs has been looking for, to push Superman to a position where he can snap, right? Where he can break. Because if he can break, then he can be recreated, right? He can be put back together in a different way, presumably falling down that darker path. Now, for Batman himself, facing off against Jaime Reyes, of course, it's Batman, right? So he's always quick thinking on the spot. And so what he does is he looks at Jaime and he says, technically, your scarab can't really be infected, but you can, which means if you're infected, your scarab's not. So literally reaching into Jaime, yanking the scarab off and putting it on himself, basically he has all the powers of the Blue Beetle now. But it does allow him to basically take back control of the Fortress of Solitude, which Jaime Reyes has been controlling this entire time. And so from there, he ends up basically temporarily knocking out Commissioner Gordon, and then starts talking to Superman. And this is where Williamson basically makes this really, really good point in terms of why they don't fall down the path of becoming bad guys. Because Batman starts to basically speak with Superman and saying, look, I get that you're angry. And so as a result of that, Batman kind of talks him down and says, look, you've got to chill, you've got to relax. If we end up becoming like the villains that we're facing, we'll be better villains than they ever were. The other part of this, and the reason why these stories work so well, is because Batman basically makes this statement, right? Superman always told Batman that you always worry too much. But the response of Batman is, I never really worry. Like, I've never really worried about things because I trust you. And that's a very important thing, right? Because what it shows is that Batman recognizes the strength of Superman, not insofar that Superman can punch really hard and fly fast. Those are things that Batman, of course, recognizes, but it's the strength of Superman's character. It's the fact that Superman is not so easily corrupted. And again, with the Batman Who Laughs universe, it's not only the Batman Who Laughs basically talked Superman into killing his family and he was just easily manipulated. They literally had to use kryptonite in order to turn Superman in that way, right? So Superman's almost this incorruptible thing. That's the whole entire nature behind Doomsday Clock, right? Superman is incorruptible. He can't be screwed up that way. And Justice kind of flies in the face of that, but it's injustice. It's different. It's different. It's not the same thing. And so as a result of that, of course, the watchtower of the Batman Who Laughs is basically pushed into the sun and destroyed. And then in turn, the response of Batman and Superman is to talk to Commissioner Gordon. And that's the important thing to bear in mind here, is that when Batman was talking to Superman and essentially talking him down, what he told him is, you have to let Supergirl and Shazam go because you chasing after them is a distraction. That's basically what that is. Don't let them distract you in that way. Let them go off and do their thing. We have to destroy this watchtower. But when they're talking to Commissioner Gordon, it's basically saying, hey, look, there's a way to bring you guys back. We'll figure out what it is. We'll turn everybody back to the way they were. So if you really believe this is a permanent thing and you've somehow officially won, then please understand that's not the case. And that's when he chimes in and says, but where do you think your friends are going though? And of course, that's when we end up realizing that in reality, the Batman Who Laughs kind of saw this coming. Now, again, that's where things sort of wear thin. And that's why I say the nature of Batman really kind of wears thin, right? Because if you take everything that Batman does and you apply it to a different character, then suddenly you start to realize how redundant Batman is. And it's one of these things where it's like, well, the Batman Who Laughs always saw this coming. He had this all planned out the entire time. And so because of that, he was able to overcome whatever plan Batman had. It's one of those funny things, Batman does the exact same thing. He's written the exact same way. Batman is always like, he always comes out on top. And that you're basically seeing the nature of Batman thrown onto a different character. So I would submit, if what's going on with the Batman Who Laughs really kind of bores you, imagine what it's like reading Batman all the time. It's pretty much the exact same thing. The difference is that his stories are just told differently. But it's kind of cool here because when they get down there, of course, what they end up realizing is they were played the entire time. And this entire scheme was never expected to succeed. The scheme of like the satellite being pulled through and all that kind of stuff, there was no expectation it was actually going to work, right? Because if it was, why leave it to some group like the Secret Six, which could easily and most likely be overtaken by Batman and Superman? So the whole purpose behind what it was that Batman Who Laughs wanted to do was essentially instigate this entire circumstance where it looked like things were going to pop off, Batman and Superman were going to respond, they were going to get into a great big huge fight, and knowing how things were going to go down, they were going to have to basically let some of the members escape and do whatever it is that they were going to do in order to stop the watchtower from basically transforming the entire world into a world of people who laugh. And so in doing that, it left the door open for Shazam and Supergirl to take off and to basically free the Batman Who Laughs. And so now he's kind of out of his cell and back into things again. And so what this does is it basically, really forces Batman and Superman to come to the realization that keeping everything that was going on to themselves, and certainly not bringing in Wonder Woman, who's part of the Trinity, was the wrong mistake to make. And of course, she's going to be pissed. But everything else that goes on with the Batman Who Laughs is actually followed in the Batman Who Laughs and the Infected. You're the villain, hell arisen, right? So it follows their own individual escapades over there. In my mind, the story's cool, but the whole concept of the Batman Who Laughs is kind of starting to wear thin. And it's really just kind of the same thing all the time, right? Like, you know, there's a circumstance that unfolds, and somehow the Batman Who Laughs was always able to prepare for a circumstance that he didn't know was coming, right? It's like Batman. You know, Batman prepares for things even if he doesn't know what's going to happen, right? So he prepares for unknown factors, which seem impossible, but when you're Batman or the Batman Who Laughs, you have the power of plot armor. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys want to see my uncensored videos, my versus videos, and all my early access videos, make sure you guys go over to patreon.com/comicsexplained. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. We've got some new patrons in our top tiers over on patreon.com/comicsexplained. I want to give a shout out to Jason C, Austin S, Jason S, Austin H, Philip, and Austin B, as well as Steven Z, Eagle F, Joey M, and Jeff R, as well as Genosis 916. As always, we just usually keep the last name to an initial. It helps you guys to maintain your anonymity. Some of you guys have expressed concern about having like your first and last name thrown out there for the world to see. I do not blame you. For you guys who have joined up as part of our Patreon tiers that are eligible for Rob Corps Honor Guard rings, those whose rings have been sent out, you should already have them. If you're a new person who just joined up and you've been part of this tier for a month, your ring will be mailed out to you. So I want to say thank you guys for being patrons.